The goal in your life is not to figure out how to be comfortable in your mental prisons, but to realize that you have the keys to set yourself free. Welcome everybody to How to Be Mesmerizing. Today we've got an incredible guest. I'm super excited. Chris Widener is with us today. Yay, Chris! Oh my gosh, this guy is amazing when it comes to the motivational speaking world. He's teaching leadership and sales, and this is one of the best speakers on the planet. Chris has been able to take what he's learned from his mentors like Ziglar and Rohn, right? Like the rock stars, legends of the industry. And now Chris is becoming one of those legends as well. He's written dozens of books. He's traveled around the country. He does so many programs. I think I read in his bio that like 1,200 presentations over the last few years. And every big company that you can think of, Chris has been there to present. And he has been gracious enough to carve some time out of his crazy schedule to be here with us. And that's what being mesmerizing is all about. So Chris, thanks for being on the show today.
I appreciate the opportunity to be on the show. I got to tell you, when I get invited to something called How to Be Mesmerizing, I think two things. The first thing I think is, holy cow, I better be mesmerizing. The last thing you want to do is be boring on a show called How to Be Mesmerizing. The second thing, though, is I was raised by a woman who loved words. And so she taught me, so in my speeches, I do a lot of, like the word integrity shares the same root word with integer, the old math term. They both mean to be whole or complete or undivided. Confidence means with faith, all these. But I want to ask you a question. Do you know where the word mesmerize comes from?
So I ran a chain of hypnosis practices for 25 years.
Oh, you do? Yeah.
And so, Fran Anton Mesmer,
Fran Mesmer, yeah.
Mesmerism that.
I love this. I love that story. It's so great.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So
I hope to mesmerize you today.
Oh, you already have. It's an interesting tale with him. And so just for our audience, because I always chat for a few minutes before we go live with our podcast, just to kind of feel out how the guest is going to be and how to ask questions if I don't personally know them. And so, but Fran Anton's Mesmer, he was so captivating and so charismatic, but he was also arrogant, right? And that ended up being his demise because he was magnetizing. He thought that there was this energy inside that it would cause these fluids to move in your body, and then it would create a healing inside. And so he started magnetizing all these things, and then eventually he kind of magnetized himself, right? He called it animal magnetism. And so people would like be touching him, and they would go into these trances, and he started to get really full of himself. And that is what crushed him. So when I'm talking to Chris, the first thing Chris says, for everybody that's listening, he's vulnerable, he's honest. He says, hey, I'll tell you about the things I screwed up on, the mistakes that I've made. Because, a lot of times when you hear somebody that's spoken around the world and written so many, successful books and is so popular, it's like, how do you even, measure up to that? And Chris, right off the bat, you were humble and you were like throwing yourself on the sword. And I really thought that in itself is more mesmerizing than all the successes that you've created because you've been able to stay humble.
Thank you. Yeah. And failure makes you humble. So when you have some failures like I have, it allows you to be humble. And humility is something that will take you far. I mean, you still got to be, bold and ambitious and provocative and some of those kinds of things. But it's a hard mixture, especially when you have some success in a world like acting or singing or the speaking world. I always tell my wife, there is a reason God did not give me a great voice or the ability, singing voice, or the ability to play the guitar, because I would be a monster, egomaniacal, crazy person. In fact, I'll tell you a funny story. I worked in college. I did an internship at a church in Fargo, North Dakota. My degree was in youth family work. And it was a big mega church, like a Lutheran church, 4,000 members. And I got to be friends with the music director. And he said, Chris, why don't you come and sing in the choir? And I said, oh, okay, great. He said, be there Wednesday night. We'll have you sing in the choir. So I show up on a Wednesday night, and he asked me to sing or something like that. I don't remember exactly how it was. And then afterwards, he said, let's go out and let's grab, a Coke or an ice cream or something like that. I said, okay, great. And he said, something is really baffling to me. And I said, really, what's that? And he said, you have the strongest tenor speaking voice I've ever heard. And I said, oh, thank you very much. A strong tenor voice. He said, somehow it does not translate to singing at all. You're a horrible singer. So, you got a little bit of the, hey, you're great, and the, hey, you're not so great. And when you realize that we're all a mixture of great and not so great, you realize you're just like everybody else.
That is so true. That is so true. I was just working, doing a little coaching with a mom who came in to see me. She was having some panic and anxiety, and her greatest fear was that she was going to mess up as a mom. And I'm like, oh, you definitely are. And it'll be
for sure. Join the club.
Yeah, it'll be okay because everybody does. You got to be reassuring and love yourself and support yourself through this, because that's the only thing that you can control. A lot of times we look for how do we control our life, and we try to control all these external things. And that never works. So learning how to control how you take care of yourself, what you focus on, your self-motivation, all that is within your reach. So you've traveled. The first question that I have, you've traveled and spoken in China and Egypt and Singapore, all over the place. So what have you learned? Take our listeners behind the curtain with you. It's the first time you're traveling abroad. You're going to speak to did you have a translator? And what did you learn that would be something that's interesting that most people would never have that experience?
So I'll start with the translator. That's a quicker question. The only place I've really ever had to use translators was I did a huge event, 12,000 people in Barcelona, in the stadium where the Dream Team won the 92 Olympics, I think it was, 92, 96, Michael Jordan, Charles Barkley, those guys.
Yeah.
And they had in the back, behind the stage, they had a set of these, they were made out of plywood, but they looked like phone booths. And there was like 13 of them, and there were people inside every phone booth, and they were listening to the speakers, and then they had microphones. And then as the audience came in, they got earphones based on what language they heard in, so Italian, Spanish, Czechoslovakian, whatever it might be. And so they had an interpreter who was listening and then putting it right back out. So it was going from my mouth to the interpreter back out to the ears of people all over the audience. And I thought that was kind of interesting. And then when I spoke in St. Petersburg, Russia, I did a 3-day seminar there. And I had an interpreter that I did the back and forth thing. And that took me, it was a 3-day seminar. And it took me about 45 minutes to get this pace going. And then it was actually kind of fun, and he was a world-class interpreter. What have I learned most from around the world? I would say this, and that is people are people no matter where they live. In fact, I gave a speech to 7,000 Iranians in Tehran, Iran. I was in Scottsdale, Arizona, and I did the speech just like this, and they had me up on a screen. And they were meeting together in Tehran, and I gave a great speech, like I always do. I'm a professional. I did really, I did my best, and it came across great, and they loved it. But at the end, I said, I want to say something personally. There's a lot going on in the world today, a lot of politics, a lot of, combat, not necessarily war combat, although there's that, but all the ideological combat that goes on. I said, here's one thing I know about you, even though I'm not there with you. I know that you all want to be successful. You all want to be financially free. You all want to find love and have long-lasting love, and you all want your children to grow up to be better than you are and secure members of society, and you want to make an impact and leave an impact on the world. That's the same with us here in the United States. So no matter what's going on politically between our governments or in the world, I want you to know that I love you as people. And they gave me a 2-minute standing ovation.
Oh, that's awesome.
Not so much, I'm convinced, not for the speech that I gave, but for the moment in which we were all just human beings. And that was a highlight of my career, to have 7,000 Iranians giving me a standing ovation via Zoom, because I said, you know what, we're all the same. We all want the same things, and we're all in the brotherhood of life. And that was pretty powerful.
Oh my gosh, that gave me chills, Chris. That's incredible. Whew, that's good. All right. Well, we could end it right there, but we're not, because that was so good. And we're going to keep going. So, oh my God, that's very powerful and so true, right? We all think that we're so separate, and you can never understand what I'm going through, but we do. We have the same hopes and dreams. We have the same worries and fears, and learning how to love ourselves better helps us to be able to love others more, right?
Yeah,
and
for sure.
away from the fear and the greed and all this stuff that creates all the problems.
For sure.
So what are some things, I know you teach a lot on leadership and sales and peak performance and everything. So is there one thing that you talk about a lot? Like if you could, teach somebody only one or two things that you've learned from your whole lifetime of study, what might be one or two of those things, those golden nuggets?
So the primary thing that I talk about is from my book, The Art of Influence. It's kind of funny to me. I'm writing my 21st book this month, and I end up doing 99% of all my speeches on my 4th best-selling book. My 2 best-selling books, I never give speeches on. I mean, never. Like I can't even remember the last time I gave a speech on 12 Pillars, which I wrote with Jim Rohn, or my best-selling book called The Angel Inside. Mm-hmm. So I do a lot on the art of influence, and it's about how to be a person of influence, how to make a difference in other people's lives, whether you're a leader or you're selling to people. And it's about how to create trust, respect, admiration, and loyalty from other people. It's not persuasion based. In fact, the subtitle is Persuasion Begins with You. So it's not what do I do to you to get you to buy from me or to follow me. It's what do I do to myself that causes me to be the type of person that you trust, you respect, you admire, and you will be loyal to because of what you see in me. So it's really a personal transformation message. It's not a persuasion technique message. It's a personal transformation message. It's a self-help message. It's what do I need to do to myself? You know, Jim Rohn always said, work harder on yourself than you do on your job. I would say work harder on yourself than you do in persuading other people, and you will persuade other people because they'll look at you and say, I want to be like that person. I want to buy from that person. I want to be in business with that person. I want to follow that person because they trust, respect, and admire you.
Yeah, that's beautiful. You know, a lot of times they're buying your energy, right? They're buying feelings, right? All the time. That's what we're buying a lot is our feelings. And so, you know, I love that. You know, that's the best trainers in the world. It's like you get a little piece of the truth. And one of the truths in the world is you got to keep working on yourself and developing yourself. You know, we're always looking outside to try to find the answers when they're always inside. And even when you're working with a coach, they're always going to direct you. A good coach is always going to direct you back inward. You know, learn to go within, you never go without, right?
I'll give you an example. I went through a divorce 4 years ago. Yeah, 4 years ago. And I'd been married 27 years. And the wheels just fell off, and my kids were grown at that point. And I took a couple of years of counseling. I wanted to figure me out. And I thought it was important. And so I ended up, I got married recently, 6 weeks ago in Florence, Italy. Oh. And as we prepared, it was interesting. We both wanted to make sure that we fixed ourselves before we got into something else. So one of the first questions, not the first, but one of the first questions when we started getting serious that I asked Denise was, what would your ex-husband tell me is the reason that you guys got divorced?
Oh my God, what a great question.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I said, I can probably tell you what my wife would say, my ex-wife would say. And so we started really digging in deep. And so we ended up writing a book that's going to be coming out that is based on our preparation for getting married the second time. Wow. And chapter number 1 is don't make the same mistake twice. That doesn't mean don't pick the wrong person twice, but that's really what if you ask the average guy, why did you get divorced? What's he going to say? My wife was whatever. Yeah. You ask the average woman, why did you get divorced? My husband was a real jerk. It's always other centered, right?
Yeah.
Our concept of don't make the same mistake twice is don't come into it with the same problems. Because as I often said was, if my first wife didn't like it, my second wife probably won't like it either, right? So I did something interesting. I texted my ex-wife and I said, I'm doing a lot of internal reflection and I'm wondering, would you help me out? Would you tell me the 3 things that you think most contributed, that I did, that most contributed to the demise of our marriage? And she wrote me 3 things. And I wrote back to her, I said, thank you very much. And then she wrote me 3 more things. And I said, thank you very much. She said, I'm not helping you out anymore. But I think that a lot more second marriages would go well if we would say, what did I do wrong? But we tend to just, that was her fault. That was his fault. But we do that. We fail in business and we go, well, it was the economy, or people just didn't understand how great my product was, instead of going, I suck at marketing, or, I had a bad product, or my idea wasn't good, or whatever. And I think I do this a lot in my speeches. I hold my hands up, and this is the mirror, right? Mm-hmm. So I'll talk about integrity. At the end of that section, I'll say, I don't know you. I don't know what goes on in your heart, but you do. You need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, am I a person of integrity? Am I a person who other people are going to be able to trust? And so I think that that's very, very important for us in every area of our life. People say, oh, I just can't lose weight. Have you looked at what you're eating? Have you looked at the fact that you want to go to the gym 6 days a week, but you only make it 2? Everything begins and ends with us. My friend Larry Winget, I don't know if you're familiar with Larry or not, but Larry's a very well-known speaker over the last 30 years. And he basically, he says your children are your own fault and you're broke because you want to be. I mean, these are the titles of his books. Your children are your own fault. You're broke because you want to be. Shut up, stop whining, and get a life. And I love Larry for that, because he basically says, if you're going to be successful, you got to look at yourself. You can't blame other people for anything. We all have obstacles, but it's not the obstacles that keep us from success, because the most wildly successful people also go through obstacles. Most of the people on the Fortune 400 list, or the Forbes 400 list of wealthiest Americans, they've had bankruptcies, they've had failed businesses. I always like to make the joke, it doesn't work anymore because Jeff Bezos is now the richest man in the world. But back when Bill Gates for 20 years was the richest man in the world, I would ask the question, did you know that you can have one of the biggest failures in history and still end up the richest woman in the world? So Melinda Gates met Bill Gates because she worked at Microsoft. And Melinda Gates oversaw a project that was going to revolutionize Microsoft. And that project was called Bob. Do you remember Bob?
No.
Of course you don't. Nobody remembers Bob, because it was an utter disaster. It was a complete and total failure. They rolled it out and it just went right over the edge of the cliff. But she worked with Bill Gates and they fell in love and she got married and became the richest woman in the world, even with one of the greatest failures of all time. So, failure is never an end. Sometimes it actually makes you the richest person in the world.
Well, that's really interesting. You could probably still use that joke and modify it, because Bezos just got divorced. So his wife is now one of the richest women in the world as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, yeah, that's really fascinating. I mean, it's difficult because, our level of guilt, of shame, it's much easier to blame the world around us, the president, God, the universe, our parents, our past. It's so much easier to blame instead of owning situations. And
for sure.
But owning it is the only way to be able to do something with it. Responsibility just means the ability to respond. And so I like how you're pointing it always back and having the mirror metaphor, because it's just so accurate. And it is difficult because it brings up our deepest fear that we're not enough. And so, you talked about how we have to cut through that resistance. And the resistance is that big shadow that shows up. Every time you have a dream, every time you want something, you're going to have the resistance that shows up at the exact same point and it says, never going to happen. And so you've gone through lots of challenges to be able to get to where you're at. And then even when you get to where you're at, you still have challenges, right? Just because
more challenges.
Money, yeah.
I was talking to a pastor friend of mine once, and he had a church of like 3,000 people. And he said, yeah, all these guys that are pastors of these little churches with 200 people, they all say, boy, if I only had your church, boy, that would be great. And he's like, are you kidding me? I got 3,000 problems. Every person brings their own problems, but, going back to what we were talking about, I do this thing on stage where I talk about the bad news is really the good news. And the bad news is you are responsible for your life. That's the bad news. What you weigh, you chose to weigh. The state of your marriage, you chose the state of your marriage. Your finances, you chose the state of your finances. That's the bad news. for most people because they don't like where they're at. That's the bad news. But the great thing is it becomes the good news, because if it's true that wherever you are right now is the sum of the choices you've made up until now, then it's also true that wherever you want to go is simply going to become the sum of the choices you make from here on out. So once you accept that bad news of I'm responsible, I did this to myself, it actually flips and becomes empowering and becomes the good news that, wow, I can change it. I chose to be here. I can choose to be somewhere else. I'm going to start making different choices. I used to spend all my money and now I'm broke. Now I'm going to start saving my money and I'm going to get rich, right? It's just different choices.
Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly right. So when you're going through some of that resistance, or some of the fears that we have, what keeps you going? What happens in your mind that allows you to keep moving forward?
People always say what motivates you. And I think probably the thing that motivates me most is the fact that I know it's all going to end. I was taught this lesson very early on. My dad died when I was 4.
Oh,
And he died in 1970, died when I was 4. In 1969, he had made $90,000 and he had $30,000 worth of life insurance. So we had to move out of a house that sold in 2013 for $1.8 million. It's probably $2.4 million in Seattle now. But he died when he was 40, and that made such a profound impact on me that life is short and you only get one shot. My brother's 13 years older than me. And on his 40th, on his 41st, no, my dad died when he was 41. That's right. He died when he was 41. He was born in 1929, died in 1970. When my brother turned 41, my mom called him to wish him happy birthday. And she said, "How are you doing?" He said, I'm actually doing really well. I feel really great today. He said, "I got to tell you though, Mom, I've been really kind of depressed and scared the last year." And my mom said, "Well, why?" And he said, "Well, Dad died when he was 40. And when I turned 40, I got really scared that I was going to die at 40. And this was on my brother's 41st birthday. My mother, who couldn't leave well enough alone, said, "Glenn, your dad wasn't 40 when he died. He was 41. And so now he spent the whole next year afraid that he was going to die. Well, he's 66 now this year, so he's made it a little bit beyond that. But I focus on the fact that I only get one life, and I don't know how long it's going to be. And Jim Rohn and I wrote in our book, 12 Pillars, you cannot determine how long you live, but you can determine how well you live. And so for me, if a failure happens, I don't just go, woe is me, because I may have 25 more years left. Well, what am I going to do for 25 years? Whine about it? No, I got things to do. I got people to make an impact on. I got people that I can help. I got a family to raise. I got a new wife to love and to travel with. And, so that's what keeps me going, is knowing that there will come a day that I don't get any more chances. I'll be laying in a bed somewhere with my family around me, and they're going to be saying, "It was great. Peace. We'll see you on the other side." And then at that point, no more chances to ride in a hot air balloon, no more chances to drive that car around a racetrack, no more chances to go to Italy and Thailand and Costa Rica, no more chances. It all ends. And I think some people might consider that morbid. I don't consider it morbid. I consider it realistic. And, there's an end, and the end comes. You may as well live life as much as you can before the end comes.
Yeah, I agree. People are so afraid of dying, but I think that being afraid of not living is what we need to be focusing on, so that we're taking advantage of the opportunities. We sacrifice so much of our present happiness trying to accomplish things that are going to then make us happy. And it's so backwards. Yeah.
I knew a wealthy family, very, very wealthy family I worked with, very, very rich, $100 million rich, planes, homes, all over the U.S. And the idea was, well, I'm going to work. And then when I retire, then I'm going to go and travel the world. Well, the problem is, as soon as he retired, his wife had a stroke and she was wheelchair bound. And all of a sudden, all their ideas of traveling around went out the window. And I'm like, you had the money your whole life. Why didn't you travel your whole life? And there are, 10 places this guy wanted to travel to, and he never traveled to.
Yeah, that's a good example. So with all the stuff that you've learned now, what's one thing, if you could travel back to when you were a little boy, what's a piece of advice that you would give that little boy that you were back in the day?
Well, it's a piece of advice that I got and I've lived by, and that is always think big. It's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. If you're going to think, you may as well think big. And I've seen that work for me time and time and time and time again. When I was 14 years old, my mom was working at Group Health Hospital in Seattle, Washington on Capitol Hill. And she worked with a guy who was about 45 years old and never made much money. He worked in the filing department. All this guy did 40 hours a week was took files and alphabetized them and stuck them into a file. I mean, this job was boring and it didn't pay much either. He borrowed $7,000 from a rich uncle of his, and he bought the Northwest license. Alaska, Washington, Oregon, Idaho, and Montana, to self-watering flower pots. These flower pots had a base where the water went, and then they had another piece that sat down in it where the plant went, and it had like a nipple that went down into the water, and based on how you move the trigger around, it would suck more or less water up into the plant. So this guy says to me, "Hey, how would you like to make some money selling pots?" And I said, "Sure. What do you pay me?" He said, "I'll pay you $1 a pot." Now, he thought I was going to go door to door and sell pots on doorsteps to little old ladies. I was 14. I had my mom buy me a blazer, a blue blazer, and I called up Ernst Home Centers. It might have been Pay and Pack. I can't remember. I think it was Ernst Home Centers. And they were this was long before Home Depot and such. And they were localized, and they had a couple hundred stores in the Northwest. And called them up, and I made an appointment to come in and show the buyer a self-watering flower pot. He was shocked when a 14-year-old with a blazer that didn't fit came walking in. But I showed him this thing, and it worked. It literally worked. And he says, "I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I will buy 4 boxes per store, 20 stores for a year." So there were 24 in a box, but let's call it 25. So he bought 100 pots per store times 20 stores, 2,000 pots for a year. 24,000 pots. I sold 24,000 flower pots on my first sales call I ever did in my life. As a 14-year-old, I made $24,000 on my first sales call ever. Now, here's the problem. I went back to this guy and I said, "Hey, I sold some pots." And he said, "You did? How many?" And I said, 24,000 pots. And he goes, "What are you talking about?" I said, "I sold them to Ernst Home Center." And I kid you not, Tim, he got so scared, he called the company back up and said, "I don't want to do this anymore. Send me my money back."
Wow.
And so here's this 14-year-old who realized it's just as easy to think big as it is to think small. I may as well call. Why would I schlep around on doorsteps for $1 a house when I can call Ernst Home Center and sell 24,000 pots in a 30-minute meeting? Compared to a guy who got so scared by success and money. If I was making $1 a pot, I can't imagine what he made on that sales call. He would have made probably $5 a pot. He just made $125,000. And he got so scared by success and a big business. I think he was probably thinking, "Hey, if I could move a couple hundred of these pots a month, it'll probably, it'll pay my car payment or something like this." And he got so scared. Now, the thing that really bothers me is my mom didn't go out and borrow $7,000 from somebody and buy it, and then we flip it and we sell the pots to Ernst. But it never happened. But that was my first lesson in the magic of thinking big. Second one that was really big was when I walked into the National Speakers Association the first time. I looked at 2,000 independent speakers, and in the next 2 years, I licensed hundreds and hundreds of audio programs from them. I put them into box sets called, one of them was called Leadership, the other was called Verbal Power, the other was called Sales Success. We created a number of SKUs, and we made one sales call. And that sales call was to a little company called Costco. And within 2 years, we were selling 50 to 75,000 units a month at $26 a piece to Costco, and then eventually Sam's Club, Borders, Barnes and Noble, and the like. And I just thought, why go into some little bookstore and ask for, consignment when we could go to Costco and they might just buy some, and they were buying 50 to 70,000 boxes a month.
Wow. So how'd you get the idea to do it? How'd you get to when you were 14, where'd the inspiration come from instead of going door to door, which is how most people would think? Where'd the idea come from?
Probably lazy. If you think about it, I'm probably lazy. I don't know. It just seemed to me like I want to make the most. Where would I make the most money? Well, most money would be if some big company bought it, not if Ethel on her doorstep bought it. And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. I guess I didn't want to walk. I didn't want to walk the streets. And, I was always selling stuff. When I was growing up, I was a ticket scalper at sports events in Seattle. I used to stand on the street corner. What's really sad is you go back to Seattle now and you still see some of those kids you grew up still as adults standing on the street corner. But the 1984, I think it was 1984, Final Four was in Seattle at the Kingdome. And Georgetown Hoyas, I think Patrick Ewing was on the team. I started out 2 or 3 hours before the game with $20 in my pocket. And by the end, like 3 minutes after the game started, I had over $200 in my pocket and a ticket in the 4th row. And I wrapped up my sales for the night, and I went in and I watched the Final Four game that night, and I made $200 doing it. So I've always been kind of a salesman. I've always been a wheeler dealer. My friends tell me I had to write a book called Wheeler Dealer.
Yeah, that's funny. So I think that I want to just go back real quick and review what you said. When it came to the big idea, what you did was you asked yourself what I call a power question, right? Mm-hmm. How can I make the most amount of money? And that is the question that most people are not asking themselves. Most people are asking, how can I pull this off?
Right.
How can I get a sale out of this? And so if you're going to think big, then how do you think big? You start with bigger questions. And that is how you start to break it down, right? So you got to ask yourself bigger questions. And, if it were possible and I could sell to anybody and I could make one sale and it would be huge, who would I make that sale to? And if you don't know the answer, you start asking that question to lots and lots of people. And eventually someone like you, Chris, will say, hey, have you thought of this? And that's also the value of having a coach, which I know you do a lot of coaching. And so the value of having a coach like you is that they can get asked these power questions and get these big ideas and these big ahas that they had never had before.
Yeah,
so
for sure.
And getting a coach who's a big thinker. Sometimes you hire coaches who are so small-minded as you are, right? And so, or they haven't actually achieved the successes that you're trying to achieve. They just make their money off of, selling coaching sessions, but they're not.
Right, for sure.
Yeah.
And then you ask them, what qualified you to be a coach? Well, I got fired from my corporate job and I needed a gig, so I threw up a shingle.
Right, yeah. So, very good. That's powerful. So, when you're doing leadership programs, there's a lot of people that have that resistance, right? There's a lot of blind spots that people just are not aware that they're causing a lot of the problems they're complaining about. So do you have some ideas for how to get past some blind spots or to help people get past their own resistance?
Yeah, I got a great idea. And I did it when I had a staff of people. I did what I call a follower's review. And I've never heard of anybody else that's ever done it until they heard me talk about it. And you got to be humble. You have to be willing to learn, but it will be powerful. So at least once a year, sometimes twice a year, I would bring my staff in and they would sit around the table and I would sit at the end of the table and I had a yellow legal pad in front of me. And I said, what do I do well? What do I not do well? What should I keep on doing? And what should I stop doing immediately? And one last question. Anything else you want to tell me that you think would make me a better leader? And, the first time you do it, everybody's like, I'm not going first, so you really have to shut up. And I would shut up. I could ask, I set the ground rules. I may ask a clarifying question. Well, what did you mean about this? But I would never say, I don't do that. I never made any judgments on it, nothing. I just wrote. I wrote it down. And then my promise to them was that I would take it and I would internalize it. I'd think about it. And, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got was from a woman who worked for me. And she said in front of the entire group, you got to be willing to let these people say it in front of an entire group of people.
Oh, yeah. You got to go.
And she said, Chris, having a conversation with you is like playing catch with my dad when I was a little girl. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, well, he wanted a boy and I was a girl. And so I was a little tomboyish, but he really didn't want to play catch with a girl. He had always wanted a boy. But he knew he had to be a good dad. And so he would go out and he'd play catch with me, but he was lazy. And I said, well, what do you mean? He said, well, we would stand 15 feet apart. And if I threw it right in here and he could catch it, great. He'd throw the ball back to me. But if I threw it over his head or on the ground past him or over to the side, I had to go get it, bring it back, and throw it to him again. And she said, talking to you is a lot like that. I said, well, what do you mean? She said, I feel like if you get it, we're cool. But if it takes any sort of effort for you to understand me, you don't put much effort into it. You just kind of let it go and you brush it off. That was not something I really wanted to hear. It was not fun to hear. But I'll tell you what, that was probably 1996 when she told me that. 23 years later, I still think about it. I still talk about it. I still tell other people about it because I was willing to say, help me see my blind spots. Because the people around you, your spouse sees your blind spots. Your best friend sees your blind spots. Now, if you got a bad spouse, your bad spouse saying, you're this and you're that. If you have a spouse that just wants to keep their mouth shut because they don't want any problems, that's not good either. But if you cultivate that relationship of give and take and trust and respect and the ability to say, hey, here's something I think. I have friends. I am the least successful person in my group of friends, which says a lot. I mean, I got great friends who've made hundreds of millions of dollars and they run major league sports teams and all that. And they are more than willing, and I'm more than willing to let them tell me, you're being a knucklehead. That's a bad decision, right? Because there's an old proverb in the Bible and it says, wounds from a friend can be trusted. Wounds from a friend can be trusted.
That's good.
And that is powerful. When somebody who I don't even know comes up and says, let me tell you what you're doing wrong. Yeah, I don't listen. But when one of my friends who loves me and has a vested interest in my success says, I want to talk to you about something, even if it hurts, I listen because wounds from a friend can be trusted.
Wow, that's beautiful, Chris. I love that. All right, so there's a lot of wisdom in there that you said. First of all, one of the challenges of being someone who's an achiever, which a lot of my listeners, are achievers and we're out there trying to make things happen, or we are making things happen. The flip side of that is that we can be difficult sometimes, right? Because we're so driven, we're so focused, we're correcting on the fly. And, I've coached a lot of people like that. And I had one guy I remember always sticks out in my mind, very successful, always driven, called himself the money guy. And if you wanted to talk with him, you had to basically run next to him because he never slowed down for anyone.
Yeah.
Hey, I got an idea. Oh, hey, can I ask you a question? And he'd be, yeah, as long as you keep up with me, here's where I'm going. Right. And because he was making money, it made him less coachable because.
Oh man. I had a guy that I worked with once, Tim, and people would give him advice or something. And if he didn't like it, he'd say, how much money you got in your bank account?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And that apparently determines who's right.
Yeah.
Whoever has the most money in their bank account.
Yes.
And one time a guy says to me, we were talking about a guy who I thought was kind of a shyster, and he says, that guy made $10 million last year. And I said, the mob made $10 million last year. That doesn't make it right? But there's a lot of people. It's like whoever makes the most money wins. They're the ones that are right. Not true at all. Not a really good way to monitor who your friends should be or who you should listen to.
Well, and that's the second bit of advice that you gave that's really good when you said that, in my friend group, I'm not the wealthiest, right? Or, in my friend group, not for you, but just for anybody, I don't want to be the smartest guy in the room. I'm looking for the people that make me look like a total idiot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because
then you just got to hope that they'll hang out with you.
Yeah, right. Yeah, well, that's where my hypnosis skills come into play.
Right. I have a bunch of friends who are really wildly successful, and the fact that I've been successful, I think, helps. But one of the things that I've heard from their wives, and one of the guys ran for governor, and one of them runs a big Major League Baseball team, and people around them have said, what we love most about you when you're around? And I said, what? And they said, you make him laugh.
Yeah.
And I'm like, really? Like, especially the guy that ran for governor, his chief of staff came to me. He ran for governor twice. And he came to me and said, you can hang out anytime you want to. And I said, really, why? And he said, because he is a completely different person when you're around. You settle him a little bit. He feels a little more comfortable. He doesn't feel like he's on the stump all the time. And I found that a lot of successful people, they're trying to prove themselves to people all the time. They have to always be on. They really need people around them that will treat them like they're normal people.
Yeah, exactly right. No, not a bunch of yes men or yes women, and
for sure,
or people that are getting starstruck, and just, yeah, that's really good. So, well, that's awesome. So is there anything, I know you've got your new book coming out. So, so that's pretty exciting. Now, is it 2 different books? So with you and your wife, or is it,
yeah, that book's coming out this Christmas. It's going to be called, Better the Second Time.
Yeah.
How to Have an Amazing Second Marriage. That'll be out Christmas time.
Okay.
And then my book will be out in spring of 2020, and it's called Lasting Impact: How to Create a Life and Business that Makes a Difference. And that's what a lot of my coaching is around, is, successful individuals they've already achieved success. They're making a lot of money. They've built big businesses. Now, how do I make an impact? How do I make a difference? How do I create significance as opposed to just success?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's what I was going to ask you. You've written so many books. What made you feel like you wanted to write another one? And it always seems to go where, it's the evolution as we get older, where we're shifting from significance to connection, right? And contribution, and making a difference instead of trying to prove that you're worthy. And
yeah, I think it's probably from my own experience. I mean, it's where I'm at in life. I'm 53. I've written 20 books. I've made millions of dollars. I've spoken to crowds as large as 25,000 people all over the world. I've traveled the world. I've worked with 3 of the greatest legends in our industry: John Maxwell, Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar. I ran for the U.S. Senate in 2010. I've written a New York Times and Wall Street Journal bestselling book. I've had lots of success.
Yeah.
And I'm at the stage in, success. I'll even put quote marks. I mean, there's people that are school teachers that nobody will ever know their name other than the kids that come through their class every year, who are just as successful as I am. And I don't know that we determine what success really is in terms of the ways that I just defined it. But that question of is, how do you make an impact? How do you really help other people? Because when you die, if you have $50 million, you don't have $50 million anymore. It goes to somebody else, or a group of people, or a charity, or whatever. And the money goes away. But what doesn't go away is your family, your children, your neighbors, the people that worked for you, their experiences and their memories. Those are the kinds of things that really create that ripple effect through time, long after you're gone.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that too. Yeah, a lot of really good stuff coming from you. I really like this. I can see why you've been successful with reaching out and making an impact, because
thank you.
Yeah, you're really, you've got it figured out. So I'm sure it took you a while, but
I've got a few things figured out. I don't have it figured out yet, but I've got a few things figured out.
Who does, right? So maybe Zig Ziglar did. So
I'll tell you what I figured out is that I don't have it figured out. That's what I figured out. And that's a great place to be in.
It is. And to be okay with that, even though we want to keep the pursuit going, it's also, we know that we're already enough, We're already whole. We're just looking to, how do we keep learning, growing, and contributing at a bigger level? So,
yeah, for sure.
And not that you have to, but it feels good. It's joyful to be able to lift others up and focus on that.
Absolutely.
And at your own expense. I liked what you said when you said, the measure of success isn't just what we make, but there's teachers out there who could be just as successful as me. And I thought for a second, you might say that are way more successful than me, right? Because we have this idea that if, that sometimes it's bad to be successful. So we have to keep lifting others up above ourselves. And that is not the case at all. You got to feel good and lift others up. You got to do both, right?
Yeah.
Yourself and others up.
Yeah. I remember a quote by a guy named Jeff Kent. And Jeff Kent was a baseball player for the San Francisco Giants, and he was a teammate of Barry Bonds. Mm-hmm. And he did not like Barry Bonds very much at all. Mm-hmm. And at one point, he said one of the worst, but maybe one of the most telling things I've ever heard one person say about another person, certainly a teammate. He said, "You will be able to hold Barry Bonds' funeral in a phone booth."
Wow.
And I remember thinking, performance enhanced drugs aside, Barry Bonds is the greatest home run hitter of all time. The guy had an eye, and I mean, an amazing player. His dad was an amazing player. The drugs has made him hyper over the top, amazing baseball player, but not really recognized by many people as a good guy. To the point where one of his teammates said, "Yeah, there's going to be about one person going to that funeral, just enough to fit in a phone booth." And I thought, that's not how I want my life to be. I don't want people to say, "Yeah, we don't need a very big room for the funeral."
And that's when you go back to that example of, let's compare bank accounts. Because
Right.
successful doesn't make you happy, and it doesn't make you revered. It doesn't cause others to think that you're amazing, right? It might cause others to feel envious, or fear your power, right? Or want it, but it doesn't draw people. So that's not really influence. And so I like that. That's a good example. Lots of good examples.
There was a high school baseball team that shall remain nameless in Washington State, and probably the top, over decades, the top baseball team in the state. Their field looked like a major league field. Their coach was there for 30, 40 years, something like that. They won state championship after state championship. They had a field literally looked like a major league field. Sponsors lined up, everything, and they did his funeral when he died, and they invited everybody that ever played for him. And I think 3 people showed up because nobody liked the man at all. Nobody liked him at all. Even though he was a winner, nobody liked him at all. Everybody's like, I'm not going back to recognize that guy. And you might have a school teacher or a nurse or, somebody like that who's never going to get any sort of fame, recognition, wealth, and they'll have 1,000 people at their funeral because they impacted people's lives. That's the kind of life I want to live. Not just achievements, but actual impact.
Yeah, that's super good. So, all right, we've been talking a lot, and so where can people find out more about your books, more about your coaching programs, more about, I know we're going to have chriswidener.com in the show notes and any other links that I can find to promote you and your upcoming books. So
yeah, they can go to Amazon. They can find all my audio programs, all that kind of stuff. 2 other links that I'll give out. If people are interested in the professional speaking business, they can go to Widener Academy. I put together 45 professional speakers, and together we've done $1 billion in the speaking business. It's the most comprehensive course on the public speaking business ever. It's 63 videos taught by 45 of the world's top speakers the last 30 years. If you use the phrase save 50, SAVE 50, no space between the E and the 5, save 50, it'll save you 50% off if you're interested in learning how to become a professional speaker. Or if you're just interested in coaching, you can go to widenercoaching.com, and there's a video there that tells you what it's like to work with me, and also a way to get a free 15-minute consultation to work with me and see if we're a good fit working together. I take a limited amount of people. I never have more than 10 clients at a time because I want to make sure that I give good personal advice to people. There is a significant investment, but it's the kind of thing that people who want to take their life and business to the next level, they're willing to jump in and make that investment in their life and business.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you're coaching people, because I know a lot of people who want to get out there and start speaking, and I imagine you spent a lot of time just helping them get over their fears and think bigger, and then giving them, great ways to work from the stage. So would you find that, what would be a marketing tip for them? Because I know a lot of people, I speak with lots of speakers, and a lot of times they end up doing speaker trainings and programs. And so, and they'll usually start with, just pick up the phone and call your contacts and call the people that and do all the freebies and join Toastmasters. Is there any other trick that you have up your sleeve that would be useful for somebody who's trying to take their speaking to the next level?
Well, the first thing is there's an old saying, the best marketing is a great speech. If you give a humdinger every time you step on stage, and there's other people in the audience that can hire you, and they run up to you and go, I want you to come give that speech for us. If you're in a corporation, the other division managers will say, come give that to my division. Or if you're talking to a group of CEOs and they say, come give that to my company. That's the best way, is just be fantastic. Be mesmerizing,
Yeah.
to use the current term. But the other thing is we use LinkedIn a lot. And, the easiest tip is whatever state you live in. If you're a beginning speaker and you want to start speaking, even locally, you maybe got a day job and you can't go off and travel too much. Let's say you live in Michigan. Type in the words Michigan Association Executive Director in your search in LinkedIn, and you will get all. And then when you come to the frame where you can sort of sort, go to people, and then go to place and choose Michigan, and then choose current position, because sometimes they will list that they used to be an executive director, now they've moved on to something else. If you will check Michigan as a current job position of executive director, you'll have tons of executive directors of associations. Make a connection with them, reach out to them, serve them, see if you can write an article for their association newsletter, any of those kinds of ways that you can actually help people like that get your foot in the door. Associations are a great way to start because you can start locally. They usually have okay budgets. They don't have great budgets, but if you're relatively new, you're not going to be able to ask for a lot of money anyway. But then if you do well, they'll refer you to other states. I just did one for the Arizona State Association of Dry Cleaners and Launderers.
Wow.
And part of my agreement is if I kill it, which I will, you will email out to the other 49 state executive directors.
Oh,
and
wow.
he did. He gave me a great endorsement, a written endorsement that people can see on my website. Chris came out to our thing and he killed it. And then he emailed 49 other state executive directors. That's a great way of doing it.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Outstanding. Two great pieces of very detailed, practical content that you can use. So everybody that's listening, you just got a taste of what it would be like to work with Chris, either personally with his coaching or using his programs, because he gave some very practical advice that you can start to use right away. There's so many people out there in the world who are telling you how to be, but they don't tell you how to actually be it. Right? That you should be this, and you got to do this, and you got to feel this, and they don't actually tell you, how do I pull that off? And my whole shtick is about figuring out the psychology and then the strategy. And you just shared strategy, and you've been sharing psychology through our whole entire program. So Chris, that's outstanding. Thank you so much for being a part of this program. I really, I've learned a lot. I love your stories, and I'm excited to continue to promote you and get you out there in an even bigger way in the world. This has been really great. So thanks so much for being a part of our program today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Let me know how I can help get the word out about it as well. And I appreciate the chance to be able to share some things that I've learned. When I was in college, I worked with street kids in Seattle. And the guy that ran that group of people, we used to go in on every Saturday night, and we used to go into this place called the Sunshine Inn, and we'd bring sandwiches and stuff. And initially people would leave. We're like, that's weird. Why don't they come get the food? But what they were doing was they were going to tell other people, and they'd bring them back. And I asked one guy one time, and he said something really interesting. He said, I'm just one beggar telling another beggar where the food is. And I use that as an analogy. I'm just a guy who learned a few things, and I'm going to tell other people the things that I've learned. Maybe cut down your learning curve, cut down some of the pain, cut down some of the effort, cut down some of the money investment, cut down some of the time. I'm just one beggar telling another beggar where to get food.
So good. That is really good. I love it. So, well, there you go. I mean, I can't say it any better than that. That was really good. So awesome. Thank you, Chris. I appreciate you and all of your wisdom, because it's pretty amazing. So, and everybody else that's listening, you're awesome too. And so I really appreciate you being here. If it wasn't for you, then Chris and I would have just had an awesome conversation. But the fact that we know that you're here with us right now and you're a part of this is what makes us, that's what it's all about. And so I hope you take the wisdom, the stories, the strategies, and share this episode with your friends and the people that you care about, because there's a lot of nuggets in here, a lot of great stories that Chris shared that will help make a bigger impact for you and those that you care about. So thanks so much for being here, and we'll see you next time. Make today a sure success, and go out there and be mesmerizing. Thanks, everybody.
Hey, would you like more free tips on how to be a mesmerizing leader? Then check out mesmerizingleadership.com, and also hang out with me on Facebook. facebook.com/Tim Shurr. Thanks so much, and make your day a sure success.